In most essences, complexity is obvious. A line is drawn-outness, progression leaving a trail. A direction is a goal of progression chosen among others avoided. Every articulated image offers some spatial or temporal pattern which is essential to that essence. There is no limit to this complexity in unity. The system of any world is one essence. The whole realm of essence is one essence. There is therefore one essence which is absolutely infinite in complexity, but doubtless many others are infinitely complex in particular respects or categories. As number is, they would seem no less hostile and exorbitant to human imagination. The reader must forgive me if I repeat a warning. A certain lofty and idealistic sound in the word essence should not tempt his tender mind to regard essence as somehow more human than matter. Let him be disabused. The friendliness of essence is not intrinsic to that eternal sort of being, but hangs on two circumstances. One, that being non-existent, all essence is innocent and incapable of injuring or threatening him materially. The other, that when actually given in intuition, every essence is luminous and not estranged from him by any doubt or veil. Matter is neither luminous nor innocent. It is therefore no object for contemplation. But nevertheless, there lie all his hopes. Hence he sprang, on that he feels, and there he must leave his mark if he would render existence more friendly to the spirit. It is by the shifts of matter in the world or in the brain that essences are revealed. Very few can appear to human intuition at all, and still fewer to a sane human mind. Happy the man who, in bringing to light those which to him can be enlightening and congenial, leaves all the others to loom forever in the distance, like ancient gods respected but not worshipped, monstrous, tedious, occult, and inhumanly complicated. In essences actually given, the complexity possible is limited by the intellectual scope of the thinker, and this is not great. Man, harassed as he is by pricks of fortune and irrelevant calls, has to rely on the organization of his thoughts to make up for their poverty. If he does not misread his signals, he seems intelligent, though his spirit may be a blank or a stream of ticking trivialities, like the sound of the telegraph. The greatest men hardly have one great moment. Their minds seem great only when the historian reviews their various actions or accomplishments, and pieces together a mythical source for them which he calls a great mind. There was never an actual greatness, a living thought, mastering and directing the whole, and the historian himself is as incapable as his hero of gathering up that desultory competence into an actual intuition of the whole achievement. Eloquence, or the spell of some right, serves at best to hint at such an unrealized greatness, and man must commit to monuments, to books, to intuitions, the suggestion of those visions which he never had. So seeds carry over from generation to generation, a laboring something which we call life. It has an inward determinate potentiality. There is something which it would be, but when and where, in what joyful bridal or victorious cry, is that potentiality realized? The best seems still more than half hope and a strange uncertainty, and when we look at our clearest thought, at our most comprehensive intuition, we find in it almost nothing. we are always at crossroads in a narrow valley, the whole world but a vague object of faith, only this poor halting place actually ours. So much is nature the mother of spirit, a child at the breast, it must be fed at every turn by things, resigning to their ministry that authority which it cannot exercise over itself. These things, when great originally or made great by material labor, first suggest to the spirit what ought to be its stature, if it aspires to comprehend them. It is they that keep it plodding in the path of progress, and compel its lantern light to creep wonderingly over their vast breadth. Thinking is like telling one's beads. The poor repeated mutterings of the mind compose beyond themselves a single litany, a path leading humbly step by step past every mystery up the mountain of knowledge. It makes no difference to posterity how violent or prolonged may have been those effervescing thoughts which left this sediment of habits and institutions. What still matters is the seed-like power in this sediment, when stirred afresh, to generate in other spirits intuitions pure, juster, more classical than those into which nature might have budded untaught. The syntheses of art are far greater and more comprehensive than those of life. If many poets had collaborated to produce the works of Homer or of Shakespeare, these works would still be what they are. In any case, each poet is many poets in act, as many as he has moments of poetic inspiration, and the psychic continuity of his animal person, crammed full of idiocies and vain prose, is far less rigidly pertinent to his message than is the material collection of his works. Material works, customs, and ceremonies are the stay of the mind. In them it grows sober, madcap that it is in its dreams. Without them its fine thoughts would go out like sparks, occurring to nothing and transmissible to nobody. Even such familiar unities as we all profess to survey clearly, a landscape, a political event, a system of philosophy, are commonly unrealized mythical objects. We observe some casual feature and implicitly assume a system of other features which we might observe seriatim. Have we the time and the patience and the prophetic heat with which we hail this reality is out of all proportion to our actual understanding. We are satisfied if we can go on believing that the hidden truth would justify our sentiments, could we survey it synthetically, and what we call our knowledge is really only a string of miserable phrases and small points, supported by the rash conviction that behind them lies a great truth, a familiar, friendly reality from which we are never far and about which we are never wrong. There has been much play of dialectic, for instance, in the Parmenides of Plato, about the one and the many, without ostensible result. Unity and plurality are essences. They find an obvious and, up to a certain point, a sure application in things, to which circumstance they doubtless owe the clearness and confidence with which we conceive them. But they cannot be expected to be the intrinsic essences of anything existent. The existent will be many and one in 1,000 ways without being one or many absolutely. Pure unity cannot exist because existence by definition involves external relations. which will render many variable assertions true of that unit, and it would be by virtue of these relations, not of its inner unity, that such a unit would exist. If the one exists, then, as Plato says, it is many. But if the many exist, they are also one, since they could not exist without mutual relations which would bind them into one system. There are other reasons or relations which justify the same dialectical paradoxes. For instance, in so far as the many are many, they are each one, as well as being one in their totality. There is no natural end to this shuffling of aspects. In the realm of existence, as Heraclitus and Hegel have urged, unity is manifold. Things are without other individuality than that which they acquire by proxy when some essence is embodied in them. And as substance is indefinitely plastic and forms are infinitely various, this world is much more emphatically a medley than a unit, and yet it is one in some respects, and in its dynamic continuity, and in its speculative totality or system. An extreme violence is done to nature when such simple ethereal essences as unity and multiplicity are hypostaticized. The result is a metaphysics which excludes the possibility of any physics, that is, of the only elements in metaphysics which describes matters of facts. And the more intense the realization of these essences is in intuition, the farther the contemplative mind flies from nature and from any understanding of existence or any belief in it. When, however, an essence with some precise articulation actually appears in thought, the alleged conflict between unity and plurality is perfectly solved, or rather is proved never to have existed. Suppose that in an architectural mood I stop really to consider and survey a facade. Could it, in an aesthetic sense, be a facade if it was not one composition? Could it be a composition if it had no parts? Could it be this individual composition if not composed of precisely these elements and precisely these relations? Of course, I am not speaking of the stones and mortar and their chemical constituents. From them, as from the instruments of an orchestra, are wafted to me certain material influences which kindle my intuition and, at this juncture, evoke this vision. I am speaking of this revelation of a moment, of something homeless in the world, though visiting me there under the gracious influence of this place and hour. I am speaking of an essence. I am satisfied if in respect to any and every essence all cavil ceases, and it is heartily acknowledged to be just as much one and just as complicated as it happens to be, the complexity being complex because synthesized in a single medium, and the unity specific because composed of just these elements, merged or contrasting in just this manner. This perfect and eternal individuality of every complex essence is a point worth meditating upon. It helps to make evident the infinity and, so to speak, the democracy intrinsic to the realm of essence, and the admirable absence from it of such things as scale, transition, genesis, or contiguity between its members. I say between its members because, of course, within one essence or another, these relations, like all other forms of being, are bound to be contained. Duration, specious time, change, repetition, etc., are all essences perfectly open to inspection, if not to description. The idiosyncrasy of each is absolute, and when they appear, the peculiar relation between their parts, which is their very essence, appears within them. But this very idiosyncrasy renders it impossible that one should become the other, or be composed otherwise than as an act it already is. In such suppositions we are shifting our attention from the complex essence to be inspected and substituting some view of our previous experience or of the material conditions which we presume have brought that essence to our notice. These historical vistas may be true, but they could not be so if the synthesis which composes the vista did not faithfully render, here and now, the method by which events have unrolled themselves then and there. The question of the truth or descriptive propriety of an essence is therefore a second question, entirely subsequent to the question or fact of what this essence is. That change occurs continually in nature is true, but only because in the essence of change we have given together in a single image the successive phases of an event which, when change is enacted, are necessarily alternative. This power of projecting given essences and assigning them to things as their characters or as their relations enables discourse to thread the labyrinth of nature dialectically. Far from removing from the complex essences so projected and used their perfect individuality, it presupposes this individuality to which it assimilates the untraceable flux of material events. Whatever then may be the history of nature or the genesis of intuition in us, all the forms which nature may assume are ontologically equally primary, and all the essences that may appear in intuition are equally fresh and original. Since any essence is an eternal form of being, each is grounded in itself without reference to any other. Thus, the realm of essence is an infinite plenum or continuum, in which every essence is surrounded by others differing infinitesimally from it in character. This realm is an absolute democracy by virtue of the indefeasible right of every member to its self-made place in it. And whereas in earthly democracies it suffices to be born in order to acquire every civic right, in this celestial republic even those who have not taken that risk and trouble possess full citizenship. Nor is any one threatened here by the pressure of the hard-hearted majority or by any rude government. Here is perfect anarchy and perfect peace. The population is infinite, no legislation is possible, and everybody is safe. In one sense, indeed, the being of any essence implies that of every other, for if any one essence is assured of its being because it is a distinguishable something, obviously every other distinguishable something is assured of its being on the same ground, so that an infinite multitude of essences is implied, if you will, in the being of any essence. Certainly no essence can create any other or remove it or preempt its place, that ontological place being all that an essence is. To play the dog in the manager is proper to things. Essences are always in their respective kennels. The principle of identity, when the accident of existence is disregarded, renders the number of individuals spontaneously infinite. But this principle is no force exercised somehow extraneously on individuals, or which they could pass on to one another, nor will so liberal an implication ever help thought to pass from a given essence to any other essence in particular. The intuition of the essence to be thought of next, even in the most obvious inference or deduction, must be generated by the movement of living discourse, and by the circumstances of some animal life. Essences are unsubstantial. The psyche or matter elsewhere is the substance at work. The essence last thought of was an essence only. It can trail no consequences and involve no sequel. To attribute consequences to essences is superstition. Such developments, then, as take place in nature or in discourse are all generated materially, as they were first initiated contingently, their emergence contingent, because some parcel of matter happened to exist at some place and time, so the phases they traverse afterwards are generated, if not by chance, by some impulse which happens to be native to that structure or to the material circumstances that feed and transform it. At every stage, such a development picks up one essence and drops another. Each essence, like Michelangelo's statues lying unhewn in the block, is intrinsically no better fitted for existence than any other, and cries for it no more loudly. The choice, as in the case of the statue, must be made by the genial fertility of things already existing. The artist, his habits, his surroundings. The artist is alive. His surroundings are full of fashions and movements. All these existing motions have directions. They leap and mingle and disappear like rills down a mountainside. The forms they create spontaneously. The aspect they assume may be unprecedented. And even if familiar, it is but a haunting essence, without power to reproduce itself or to exclude any particular sequel. Hence the earnestness and honesty with which the defenders of free will assert at once two incompatible things, indetermination and power. They are expressing the life of matter, which is indeed not determined exactly to reproduce its previous forms, but tumbles forward to fresh collocations, and the power in it is truly internal, not a compelling magic exercised by any fixed form, energizing either out of the past or out of the future, but indeed a potentiality or propensity within the substance concerned, a part of that blind impulse and need to shift which is native to existence. And as this universal dance was groundless in the beginning, so it remains groundless at every stage and in every factor, whether the figures of it be novel or habitual. This groundless, pervasive power, with its tireless inner monotony and its occasional outward novelties, is matter thumping in the hearts of the free willists much more loudly than in those of their opponents. Believers in necessity have caught sight of some essence, a law or habit or rule of some kind, which they make haste to clap upon nature, as if nature had no further depth, and they had touched bottom with their proverbs, as knowing people are always incredulous of things not within their experience or their books. At some depth, and in terms not at all on the human scale, nature may very well be mechanical. I shall return to this question in its place. But each factor in that mechanism would remain perfectly spontaneous, for it is not the essence illustrated here that can produce the essence illustrated there. One configuration cannot even suggest another, save to an idle mind playing with the rhymes of appearance. But substance throughout continues groundlessly to shift its groundless arrangement. One inert essence after another is thereby embodied in things. Essences inwardly irrelevant and associated even in thought only when thought has been tamed and canalized by custom. The method of this transformation may contain repetitions, and to that extent it will be mechanical, but it will never become anything but a perpetual genesis of the unwarrantable out of the contingent. mediated by a material continuity impartial towards those complications. So the common man feels that he is the source of his actions and words, though they spring up in him unbidden, and he weaves a sophisticated moral personage, all excuses, fictions, and verbal motives to cover the unknown currents of his material life. Philosophers are not wanting to do the same for mankind at large, or even for the universe. Psychologism. A doubt may here occur to the critical reader. If matter is merely a name for the convertibility of objects, would not its nature be more clearly and honestly expressed by calling it convertibility in objects rather than by calling it matter? The word matter suggests that our understanding has gone deeper, whereas in fact it has stood still. I reply that such a phrase as convertibility of objects, whereas possibility of sensation, is indeed honest transcendentally, because it describes the subjective approach to belief in matter, my belief in a concretion of expectations. But such a phrase is not clear nor honest scientifically, because any mere potentiality is a lame object. It can stand at all, even in myth or language, only by leaning on the actual facts which suggest it. The potential is either something actual but unknown, some existing seed, or else nothing in itself, and merely an expression of groundless presumptions in us, who in the presence of the actual expect developments which there is no reason should ensue. Is there no reason why the sensation of water is convertible into that of ice or steam? And is my expectation of such a change under given circumstances a pathological expectation? If not, the potentiality I poetically attribute to appearance is only my subjective approach to the discovery of something actual, namely, of a substance actually contained in both objects, and passing from one to the other by transitions too fine to be traced by my summary sensations. Clear thought and honest science must develop animal faith and not retract it. I must either renounce my expectations, as an honest skeptic would, or else believe them to be justified by facts independent of the empire of expectation over my own mind. These facts will not be mere potentialities. If objects are convertible, it must be by being actually continuous, so that they inherit from each other their time, place, quantity, and quality, even if in all these respects the variation may be incessant. The convertibility of objects is accordingly an indication of the persistence of matter, and matter is not a name for that convertibility, but for the substance undergoing conversion. A further indication of the properties of matter is found in the distribution of objects. The obvious essence of a thing does not involve the choice of any particular place or time in which it should appear. As Spinoza puts it, if there were 20 men in the world, the essence of man, while it described the constitution of each, would not involve the fact that there were 20 of them. That fact, from the point of view of man's essence, would be a material accident. There had happened to be 20 seeds predisposed to take on the nature of man, on 20 propitious occasions. The prior distribution of seeds and occasions, not the helpless present phenomena they have produced, determines the place, time, number, duration, and intensity of these phenomena. A plum pudding is a describable dish, and a recipe for it might be given. An Epicurean poem might even describe the taste of it. The cookbook and the ode are insufficient to produce it. The requisite and properly predisposed substance must be found elsewhere, wherever they happen to be. Nor can the ode and the cookbook inform me how many occasions in what particular households will give them the proof. The multiplication of puddings is an accident to the nature. The only attachment which an essence, say the Pythagorean proposition, can have to existence is that matter somewhere, say in Pythagoras, should be so predisposed by the previous embodiment of other essences that when circumstances are favorable it can proceed to the embodiment or to the intuition of that particular essence. Discourse, though immaterial in itself, gives a sort of embodiment to intuitions, as matter does to forms. But the distribution of these particular intuitions and the existence of the discourse in which they occur would be an absolute accident if it were not attached to the distribution of matter in the body of the discoursing animal and his environment. Were there no material conditions of existence, no essence could ever appear or be exemplified. Or if the being proper to essences is called existence, they would all necessarily exist once only and forever. Repetition, production, change, and dissolution would all be radically impossible. Each of these facts, whenever noted or believed in, accordingly affords evidence of corresponding mutations and diversities in the substance they modify. In other words, matter is the principle of individuation, of concretion. It renders possible the existence of cases or instances of anything. That any essences should lodge locally or temporally at any point in an existing world or in a discoursing mind compels me to invoke a non-ideal principle involved in their being here both more and less than the single and eternal essences they are, and this non-ideal principle is matter. Finally, in close confirmation of this concrete character of matter is the knowledge of it conveyed by moral experience. Death, separation, and error divorce the spirit from the essences to which it was wedded, or which at least it wooed. It is matter without, or the flesh within, that is responsible for this treason. Matter, which is the principle of existence in things and of mutation, is also the principle of imperfection in them. I know that in their ultimate philosophy many people deny that there is anything imperfect. They say everything is a necessary element of perfection. The motive for this contention is clearer and nobler than the meaning of it. Since things ought not to be imperfect, we wish to believe that they are not so. Yet if we really believe them to be perfect, we should rescind the category of the better and the worse, which we are constrained in practice to apply to them, and by our optimism all the deliverances of conscience would be nullified in order to feign that conscience is omnipotent. In reality, the nucleus of values is always some particular nature, and experience proves what the conditions of animal life imply, that particular natures do not often reach full satisfaction. Even if every dog had his day, here or hereafter, there would remain the other 364 days of the calendar which cannot be expunged from the book fate. All forms of life are strangled more or less, and many are strangled altogether, not to speak of the infinity of life that never comes to birth at all. The world is accordingly infected with imperfection. This imperfection is constitutional because the material conditions of life and of moral aspiration presuppose it, and it is a real imperfection, which it would be better not to have found, not a false sense of imperfection in a world really perfect, which would have been spoiled without this false sense of imperfection which it contains. But if imperfection exists, which the world would not be spoiled by correcting, whence this ideal, and whence the imperfection which falls short of it? The ideal, let us assume, comes from the aspiration of a spirit conscious of its goals, ultimate or immediate. The imperfection must therefore come from some contrary predisposition in things, some inertia in respect to these demands of the spirit, imposing on the spirit all this difficulty and defeat. This principle of inertia is matter, for although matter is the most dynamic thing in the world, and the seat of all energies, most of its energies are chaotic in respect to the particular tendencies of any given animal, or tribe, or idea. Thus matter, while secretly and in parvo the source of all spirit, in the gross and publicly seems its inveterate enemy. Why have we no better senses, and no better command over the senses which we possess? Why does explicit thought lag behind the mind's prophecy and intention, and why will not the right words come to express it? Why is the spirit unwilling in some, and willing in others to so little purpose? Because the flesh is weak, or torpid, or rebellious? The principle of this double helplessness of spirit, within and without, deserves a name, and the proper name for it is matter. It is the name given to it spontaneously by spiritual men, but a scientific conception of matter will confirm this intuition, and show how the same principle that determines existence, individuates cases, and distributes events, also imposes imperfection on the world, disappointing more or less every spirit that lodges in it. By its scantiness, or superfluity, or previous infection, matter spoils the expression of those tendencies which take root spontaneously in its particular parts. Substance, posited in the first instance by animal faith as the object of pursuit and of eventual knowledge, thus gradually reveals its more specific functions. It is a matter unequally distributed, lending a point of reference in the existing world for the essences appearing to intuition, individuating their instances, individuating the minds that behold them, and the occasions on which they do so, and explaining the moral predicaments of the spirit in a world irresponsibly fertile and innocently treacherous. Any essence is a model of explicitness. It is all surface without substance. When it appears entire. How, then, should any essence have implications? Implication is something in which obscurity and fate seem to be lurking. If so, it must be something imposed on essences by human discourse, leaning not on logic, but on the antecedents of existence. And yet, in dialectic, we are supposed to be elucidating the meaning of pure ideas without any reference to their truth, as if the realm of essence were a second cosmos, or rather a first cosmos, the eternal intellect or logos of God, pre-existing by a fatality deeper than any creation, and imposing itself on every possible world. By insisting on the infinity of essence, I have, in one sense, already discarded any metaphysical rationalism which should attribute this sort of prior existence and authority to any system of logic or grammar. Essences are prior to existence, but being infinitely various, they cannot determine existence to take one form rather than another. Moreover, if there be a divine logos composed of particular essences or ideas forming a closed system, it is evident that other systems, differently compacted or anarchical, would appear in the background, since the logos would explicitly exclude them from its own panorama. The preeminence of this logos would therefore not be essential, but due to a quasi-existence, to a fact or an accident. This is perhaps the reason why Plotinus and the Christian theologians have posited the One, or the Father, to be the source of the divine intellect. As this intellect is presumed to be specific, and not the infinite realm of essence it expresses by that limitation, a factual principle, a primary accident, existence, or power. Much in the same way, the transcendental logic of the Germans, supposed to control existence, has to be referred mythically to a will or a deed itself an absolute accident. In contrast to such a logos, the realm of essence forms rather a chaos than a cosmos. Any special system has alternatives and must tremble for its frontiers, whereas the realm of essence, in its perfect Catholicity, is placid and safe and the same whatever may happen in earth or heaven. No essence accordingly can imply any other in the sense of excluding from the realm of essence the opposite of the essence implied, or any different complement. From itself, an essence may exclude anything. In fact, it excludes everything not itself. But when a thing or a thought is said to preclude another, this happens only by virtue of adventitious laws of nature. A man cannot be in two places at once, not because the two places are not equally habitable or perhaps present to his spirit, because they are assumed to lie apart farther than the span of his body, and what passes for logical exclusion or implication, such a reference to existence is sometimes covert, but often it is quite direct and undisguised. All hangs on the usual connotations of language, on presumptions about the course of nature, and on the argumentum ad hominem addressed to the mental habits of mankind. Implication in the first instance is indeed a physical relation, like that of surface to volume. Such a bottle implies such a quantity of wine. Implication is the tacit commitment by which all the material detail and destiny of an object becomes relevant to intent when we point to that object or name it. So when a witness is called up in court, all his past, which may presently be unearthed in cross-examination, is implied and is set vibrating, as it were, by that summons, and this even if most of those details are then absent from his thoughts, or perhaps unknown to him. He may be astonished to find, by the implications of the evidence, that like Oedipus, he is a parricide. At bottom, the same concretions in existence govern the deductions of logic. If in looking at an object I notice that it has three corners, this specious essence, three-corneredness, which is called up in intuition, becomes itself, as it were, a summons to all the other essences which might be found in the same object upon further scrutiny. I note next, perhaps, that there are also three sides, of a length not irrelevant to the breadth of the opposite angles, and all my supervening geometry will be developed, not by deductions from the original spacious triangle, but by continued inspection and comparison of the forms of things. I may afterwards arrange my observations dialectically, redefining my terms so as to include in them the material implications discovered in nature, as Spinoza arranged his psychology. The whole system will tend to become a single essence, in which all the parts are contained by definition. But my guide to the choice and discrimination of that particular system will be, and will remain, observation of nature. The truth of each term and that of their arrangement will be still empirical. This is necessarily the case in regard to the truth of dialectic, at any level and in any degree of internal elaboration, because truth is subsequent to existence, being truth about it. Euclid or Plotinus or Hegel might be dialectical jewels without a flaw, and yet the whole truth of their systems would lie in the existence of a world which happened to exhibit the very special form of those systems with a miraculous fidelity. Truth, however, is one thing and implication another. May not one part somehow involve another in a purely ideal system? Yes, because apart from material truth, an essence fixed in discourse at one moment may become an object of inquiry and intent at another moment. When these moments are continuous, or deputed to be continuous, the specious essence first given may remain sensibly the same, and yet may be resurveyed and described in a new order, enriched by fresh analogies, measurements, or internal discriminations. And since all this subsequent analysis is but more inspection of the original essence, the new essences coming to light in the analysis, for they are new, are said to be implied in the essence analyzed. This is not strictly the case. The intuition of three-corneredness is innocent of the Pythagorean proposition and might be prolonged for all time without revealing it. But when geometry, the measurement of fields or of building plots, has reached such a proposition, the mind does not lose its old object in the new, but superposes this upon that, and feels their identity for intent. The second is but an elaboration of the first, describes without falsifying it, and transforms it only by seeing it better. In other words, a substitution occurs which is felt to be materially valid, especially when it may be reversed, and the two essences may alternate without inconvenience in the description of the same facts, as sense and calculation continually relieve each other in the practical arts. This reversible equivalence in terms is something studying to the mind. It is attentive science, altogether different from the stray fertility of some fact or of some fancy, materially dissipated in unreturning ways. In natural evolution, the original is destroyed, or if reproduced as by a seed, it is reproduced in a new instance, in a new setting, with a destiny and a face never identical, but in dialectic, the original theme subsists entire. It remains the perpetual point of reference and criterion and implication. Its children surround it only to honor it. The most mathematical triangle still has three corners, and all the descriptions and analyses by which an essence may be elaborated dialectically leave it as limpid as the sky after navigators have crossed it with their parallels and meridians, or painters have mixed their viscous pigments to match its lights. Implication, then, cannot enter into the realm of essence or become truly native to an idea unless it is turned into explicitness, that is, unless it means the actual inclusion of a part in a whole. The triangle, in so far as its three lines are included in the intuition which defines it, involves the lines so enumerated and synthesized, and each of these lines, as found in that concretion and as parts of that essence, implies the rest, as every stroke in a picture, if taken as a part of that picture, implies the remainder. In other words, pure logical implication is but analysis reversed, and subsists only so long as the whole subsists and supplies the lines of tension and the specific termini of those implications.